Taino Stories presents the continuation of 40 years of wars between the Tainos and the Spaniards in Boriken. The Spaniards had eliminated many caciques in the metropolitan area and had turned their successors into pawns of the Spanish crown, forcing the Tainos of those communities to work as slaves. It was then that the Taino warriors of western Puerto Rico decided they would no longer endure the abuses and would rise up against the system. Thousands of Tainos couldn't resist the lack of food and unfamiliar diseases brought over from Europe. Many were forced to gather gold in the rivers without food under inhuman conditions. The overcrowding was terrible because Tainos from other chiefdoms were brought into work, and there was no food, no facilities, and no system to sustain so many laborers in that task. This brought even more disease. Everything produced in the island was exported to Spain. In 1510, several things happened that do not match reality. The west of Boriken had barely been explored and was not under Spanish control, but the colonists themselves reported to the crown that Cacique Urayuan had killed a soldier named Diego Salcedo, who traveled completely alone with a group of Tainos to a remote place in Añasco. Wearing his full armor, he was carried by the Tainos to cross the Guaorabo River, and there they eliminate him. Clarification. According to the Spanish version, the Western Tainos, who were not Christians and had never met Catholic friars, waited 3 days to see if Diego Salcedo would rise again, supposedly as the Bible said. When they saw he did not rise again, they concluded he was not a god, and supposedly, instead of rebelling right away, they decided to wait a whole year to organize an uprising in 1511 while their people suffered. Told plainly, it's clear the official version has many gaps. First, how could the Tainos have known the biblical idea of 3 days if they had never been in contact with Catholic priests before at that time? Second, the Tainos and the Spaniards had already fought several battles, and the Tainos had already seen Spaniards being eliminated in combat. It makes no sense to think they believed they were gods. Many Spaniards were eliminated in Hispaniola, in Guainia, and in Loiza fighting against the Tainos, and all the Tainos knew they were mortal. Third, why would they wait a whole year to rebel when the encomienda and hunger were already destroying their communities at that very moment? That makes even less sense. The Spaniards used Salcedo's elimination as an excuse to request weapons and war dogs, blaming the Tainos without proof of an imminent attack, since more than a year passed before their rebellion. Many historians repeat the false idea that the Tainos believed the Spaniards were gods, but there is no evidence of this. Only the mistaken interpretation of friars who did not understand the language or the stories the indigenous people told them, and the fallacy that the Tainos eliminate Diego Salcedo without any evidence at all. It was all Spanish political propaganda to justify violence against the Tainos through the cabalgatas, in which they hunted them like animals. If one reads carefully, Fray Bartolomé de las Casas, in his A Short Account of the Destruction of the Indies, or the sermon of Fray Antonio de Montesinos in 1511, the result is heartbreaking. They describe scenes of Tainos eliminated in horrendous ways, children chased and subdued by hunting dogs, entire families enslaved or eliminated for a pound of cassava or a few nuggets of gold. Las Casas even recounts how the Spaniards forced the Tainos to reenact the Last Supper of Christ, only to then mock the Christian faith and eliminate them immediately afterward. That contrast is brutal. The very conquerors who proclaimed themselves Christians carried out acts of cruelty that denied any notion of humanity or true religion. That's why reading Las Casas or Montesinos is not easy. It makes you cry and wonder what kind of faith the Spaniards who acted that way could have had. In the year 1511, while serving as governor, Juan Ponce de León wrote to King Ferdinand, the Catholic, reporting that in Boriken, only 2 caciques had surrendered to the Spaniards. The monarchs were already preparing an elaborate economic monopoly to extract the wealth of the Americas through multiple companies, which we will discuss in the coming chapters. That completely challenges the colonial narrative Spain later imposed in Puerto Rico's history books. the one that tried to make people believe the tainos had disappeared around 1500. In reality, by that time, the major wars had not even begun. The resistance remained strong and organized. What happened afterward was a process of forced assimilation, in which the tainos were absorbed into the Spanish colonial culture, but not eliminated. The Crown responded by granting Ponce de Leon's request and sent reinforcements from Hispaniola, including horses and war dogs, weapons and soldiers, along with a strict order to capture and enslave the tainos who surrendered and to execute those who resisted. This order marked the formal beginning of the entradas and cabalgatas in Puerto Rico, military expeditions on horseback that became one of the most brutal tools of colonial control, devastating entire communities in the mountains and the western part of the island. Follow us for the next chapter of 40 Years of Wars between the Tainos and the Spaniards, Part 5. Because we Tainos are still here and we carry our history.